The phone call came in the dead of night. I was alone, sitting in the dark, staring at the emptiness around me. The life I had built, slipping away, all because of one mistake, one moment of weakness. My family had always laughed at my dreams, but this was different. This was the day I lost everything, or so I thought. I'd been knocked down so many times, but this time it felt final. My bank account was empty, my savings gone, and there I was, fighting just to stay afloat. And then she left. My wife, Melanie, the one person I thought I could rely on, left me for a man with more money, more power, more success. She took our investments, our future, and walked out the door without a second glance, but I wasn't finished. I wouldn't be. In that moment of despair, something inside me snapped. I couldn't let it end like this, not after everything I had fought. For the game wasn't over. It wasn't even close. I made a plan. No one knew it, but I had already started. She thought she took everything, but what she didn't know was that I had already been playing the long game. I'd been thinking ahead, plotting, and now I had a secret weapon. No one saw it coming. Not my wife, not my family, and certainly not the corporate sharks circling around me. Hi, I'm Grant Holloway, and this is how I took what was mine, turned the tables, and built an empire from nothing. It was a late afternoon when I made the decision that would change everything. My family didn't know yet, but the shame I felt in my chest was heavy enough to make my heart race. I could hear the voices of my parents, my siblings, their laughter echoing through my mind. The cruel kind of laughter. The kind that doesn't offer any warmth, just mockery and disbelief. I had just told them I was taking a job as a cleaner. "You've really hit rock bottom now, haven't you?" My brother sneered, his words wrapping around my throat like a vice. "A cleaner? Seriously? You went to university for this?" I couldn't meet his gaze. The truth was, I had never imagined myself in this position. But life, as it so often does, had a way of throwing curveballs. I'd spent years working hard in the corporate world, trying to claw my way up the ladder. But each time I thought I'd made it, the ground beneath me would shift and I'd fall back down. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't incompetent. I was just stuck in a system that didn't have room for someone like me. When I graduated with a business degree, I had dreams of high-rise offices, luxury cars, and boardroom meetings. My family had always thought highly of me. Well, at least they liked the idea of having a son who would make something of himself. The first few years were tough, but I kept pushing. I worked in various jobs, slowly building experience, and tried to convince myself that I was still on track. I'd taken on more debt than I'd ever imagined, hoping the end would justify the means. But with each new opportunity, I fell short. And then it happened. One morning, I walked into my office to find a folder on my desk. It was a termination letter. I remember feeling an odd kind of numbness. I'd seen the signs. Management restructuring, layoffs, the feeling that they were looking for a reason to cut me loose. But still, the news hit hard. The job I had fought so long for was gone in an instant. "Look at you," my mother had said when I called her to tell her about the layoff. "How are you going to explain this to your cousins? They'll be laughing at you. You're supposed to be the one who makes it big. Why don't you try harder, get a real job?" I stayed silent on the other end of the phone, the words stinging. More than I cared to admit. My pride had taken a hit. I could almost hear the disappointment in her voice. And that's when I realized I didn't know how I was going to explain this to anyone. I had spent weeks looking for another job. Any job. But the longer I searched, the more it seemed like my past had caught up with me. The job market had shifted, in ways I didn't anticipate. Experience was no longer enough. They wanted young, fresh blood with the latest skills and the latest networks. I didn't have either. I didn't know what to do. That's when I found the job as a cleaner at a local commercial property. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. It was a steady paycheck, a way to keep myself afloat. I figured that, at least for now, I could clean offices, empty trash, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what came next. But when I told my family, they couldn't stop laughing. My father, his deep voice filled with disbelief, asked if I'd lost my mind. "A cleaner, that's all you can do now?" He shook his head, probably wondering where he went wrong in raising me. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them that I hadn't given up, but the words wouldn't come. I had been swallowed up by my own pride and embarrassment. I looked down at my shoes, unable to explain that it wasn't just about cleaning. It was about surviving, about rebuilding myself from the ground up. The first day at the job was humiliating. I arrived at the office building early in the morning, the cold air biting at my face as I walked to the front door. The building was vast, high ceilings, shiny floors. Everything about it screamed success, screamed everything I was not. I stood there, holding the cleaning supplies, staring up at the towering building, wondering how I had ended up here. Inside, the workers hustled and bustled, none of them paying attention to me. They walked past me with that air of superiority, and I couldn't help but feel like a ghost. For the first time, I was invisible in the very world I once dreamed of dominating. But as the days passed, something began to shift. I didn't tell anyone about my plan. It wasn't something I was going to share with my family, not yet. They had no idea what was coming. They didn't know the fire that had been lit in me when I started working here. While they were laughing, I was watching, observing, listening. I wasn't just a cleaner. I was a man in the right place at the right time, gathering knowledge. I began to take notes, paying attention to every small detail. Who owned the building? Who rented space? What were the patterns of tenants? I watched the flow of money, the ebb and the rise of the building's value, like a heartbeat of the business world I had once known. I started noticing things that others didn't. Small cracks in the systems that ran the building. Inefficiencies in its management, opportunities hidden in plain sight. No one else seemed to care, except for me. And it became clear to me then, I wasn't just cleaning floors. I was building something bigger. I didn't know how, but I was going to make it my own. The days blended together in the first few weeks. I kept my head down and focused on the task at hand, sweeping, mopping, dusting. But in the back of my mind, there was a constant buzz of ideas. I'd always been a strategic thinker, and despite the initial humiliation, this job provided me with an entirely different kind of access. While others simply passed through the building as if they were entitled to its grandeur, I was part of its pulse, its very underbelly, and that was where my advantage lay. I would arrive early and leave late, working overtime without anyone asking. In the early mornings, when the building was still and the offices were empty, I wandered from floor to floor, taking mental notes on the layout, the tenants, the people who came in and out. Some of them were just office workers, others were executives. But what caught my attention were the building's owners, the people who sat in their high-rise offices, behind closed doors, doing the real work. I knew if I could gain their trust, even in the smallest way, I could uncover something that would give me leverage. I started by talking to the other maintenance staff. They were the ones who had the real stories, the gossip, the inside knowledge, the things that weren't obvious to outsiders. One of the janitors, an older man named Paul, had been working in the building for years. He knew every inch of the place like the back of his hand. Over time, I began to chat with him during our breaks, asking casual questions about the building's history, its management, anything I could use. He was hesitant at first, probably unsure of why I was so interested in the business side of things, but after a while he warmed up. "They're selling," he said one day, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves might be illegal. "The owners. They're looking for a buyer. Been in the works for months." I felt my pulse quicken. This was it. This was the crack in the door I had been waiting for. "Who's buying it?" I asked, pretending to care about the mundane details of property sales. Paul glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Some big shot out of New York, I think. They're offering top dollar, the whole building. But you didn't hear it from me, okay?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the information settle inside me. This wasn't just gossip. It was a golden nugget. The building was going to change hands. I didn't know how it would affect the tenants or the current owners, but I did know that people with power and money were about to make big decisions. And those decisions could open doors for someone who knew how to maneuver. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work with a newfound purpose. My cleaning duties were just a facade. While I wiped down desks and vacuumed carpets, I was also becoming a silent observer of everything happening in the building. I studied the patterns of when people arrived and left, who they interacted with, who seemed to hold the real power behind the scenes. The cleaning staff, by nature of their job, had access to spaces that others didn't. The elevators, stairwells, and storage rooms were all places that weren't routinely visited by tenants or management. It was in these places, these forgotten corners of the building, where I made my discoveries. I found a set of blueprints for the property in one of the storage closets. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. They were technical, full of jargon I didn't understand. But when I spent enough time poring over them, a few things started to click. I realized that the building was underutilized in certain areas. There were spaces, hidden floors, and corners that could be transformed into something more valuable. A little tweaking, some investment, and suddenly, the property's worth would skyrocket. I began taking notes, scribbling down ideas in the margins of my cleaning logs, my mind working overtime. I was already thinking like an owner, like someone who could see the untapped potential of the building. But there was still one critical piece of the puzzle missing. I needed to get closer to the people who owned this place. I needed them to see me, not as the lowly cleaner, but as someone who could help them make money. I used my shifts to gradually infiltrate the world of the building's management team. I started small, doing favors for the property manager. I'd go out of my way to fix minor issues. Broken light bulbs, malfunctioning faucets, things that no one else would notice. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a gesture of goodwill. But soon, I found that the more I helped, the more they relied on me. One evening after the last tenant had left for the day, I was alone with the property manager, a woman named Diane, who was busy going over some paperwork in her office. She was tired, clearly overwhelmed by the day's work. I made my move. "Is there anything else I can do to help?" I asked casually, as I stood in the doorway of her office. She looked up, her brow furrowing. "Honestly, if you could help me with these reports, that would be a huge favor," she said, motioning to a stack of documents on her desk. "I'm short-staffed this week, and I could really use a hand." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, rolling up my sleeves. "I've got some free time. I'll get through them for you." She seemed surprised by my willingness to help, but grateful nonetheless. As I sat down to assist her, I began to subtly ask about the building's history, the upcoming sale, and any details about the current owners. She didn't seem to mind. Maybe it was the exhaustion from her long day, or maybe she just needed someone to talk to. Either way, I was collecting the pieces I needed. "Truth be told," she confided in me, "the owners have been talking about selling for a while. They're just waiting for the right offer, the right buyer." I nodded, pretending to stay focused on the papers. But inside, I was on fire. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. This was the opening I needed. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. A spark, a vision of what I could become. The next move was mine. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same old routine, the same cleaning supplies in my hands, the same cold, impersonal hallways. But in my mind, things were changing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I wasn't just a cleaner anymore. I had a vision, a plan, and for the first time in a long time, I had a direction. I was no longer just surviving. I was calculating my next move. I spent every free moment I could muster gathering more intel. I didn't just clean the building, I studied it. I made note of every weak point, every opportunity. There was one particular section of the property that intrigued me, the office floors that seemed to be underperforming. The tenants in those spaces were paying a fraction of what they should have been paying, given the prime location. And while most of the building's management had ignored these empty spaces, I saw potential. I began working my way into these spaces, quietly asking questions as I cleaned. "Who rents this floor?" I'd ask one of the security guards during my shift, or a maintenance worker who seemed to be in the know. I've never seen anyone come in or out. They didn't suspect anything. They thought I was just being curious. What they didn't know was that I was laying the foundation for something big. One afternoon, Diane pulled me aside as I was finishing my shift. She had a look on her face that made me uneasy. It wasn't the look of someone asking for a favor or talking shop about the building. This was something else, something personal. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low. "Not about work, but about the owners. They're starting to get desperate. The sale is moving forward, but they're not happy with the offers coming in. They want a buyer who can take on the entire building, someone who can handle the cost. The upgrades. It's going to take a lot of money, a lot of connections. You wouldn't believe the pressure they're under. I didn't say anything at first. My heart was racing. I had been expecting the building to be sold, but I hadn't anticipated that the owners would be facing such pressure. I couldn't help but feel that this was an opportunity, a door I could walk through if I played it right. How much money are we talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Diane hesitated for a moment. It's not a small amount. They're looking for someone who can take on the entire building, renovations, management, the works. They're looking at tens of millions in upgrades, and whoever buys it has to have the capital to make those changes. She paused, her gaze flickering toward the door, as if she were worried someone would overhear. They're desperate. And it's no secret that they've been struggling to find the right buyer. That was it. I knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for. If the owners were desperate, then I could find a way in. But there was one major problem: money. I didn't have tens of millions to buy the building. Hell, I didn't even have the kind of money to pay for a single office in the building. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I had to be smart. I had to find a way to leverage what I knew, who I knew, and what I had. That night, after I finished cleaning, I stayed late poring over the documents Diane had left on her desk. The spreadsheets, the proposals, the buyer profiles, they were all there. And as I read through the numbers, the calculations, something clicked. I wasn't going to buy the building outright. No, I couldn't afford that. But I could find someone who could. I started making a list of potential investors, people who might be interested in a project of this scale. I reached out to a few contacts I had made over the years, people I knew from my time in the corporate world. They weren't billionaires, but they had deep pockets. I knew they were always looking for ways to diversify their portfolios, especially in real estate. But the real breakthrough came when I thought about leveraging my position within the building itself. As a cleaner, I had access to a wealth of information. I knew who was in charge of each floor, who was on the board of directors for the building's management company, and who could be convinced to help me move forward. I wasn't going to rely solely on external investors. I was going to play the long game, use the information I had gathered, and make the right connections inside the building itself. I began focusing on the tenants, the companies that occupied the lower-performing spaces I had observed. I would talk to them casually while I cleaned, asking them about their businesses, their goals. I made sure to seem interested without prying too much, but it was clear that many of them were dissatisfied with their current lease terms. They wanted to expand but didn't have the resources to do so. Some of them had been waiting for the right moment to make a move, but they were afraid to commit. So I decided to become their bridge, the go-between that could connect these tenants to the new owners, or better yet, to an investor willing to partner with them to take control of the building. In exchange for bringing them in on the deal, I could secure a stake in the project. I didn't need to own the whole building. I just needed a piece of it, a piece big enough to change my life forever. The next day, I took my plan to the next level. I started gathering proposals from investors I had reached out to, putting together a presentation that combined the building's potential with the tenant demands. I used the information I had gathered about the building's underperforming spaces and proposed a redevelopment plan that would increase the value of the property. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't just a cleaner anymore. I was positioning myself as the person who could change the building's future. It was a risk, yes. But then again, everything in life worth having comes with risk. If I could pull this off, I wouldn't just own a stake in a building. I would own my future. I wasn't going to let my family's mockery, my past failures, or my lack of funds stop me. I had a plan. And in this building, with its cracked walls and hidden potential, I saw an opportunity to make something great. The odds didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered was making sure that when the time came, I was in control, and that time was coming fast. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could take control of my destiny, no matter how unlikely it seemed. Every morning, I stood before the polished floors and glass walls of the building, and I could see more than just office space. I saw possibility. The whispers of doubt still lingered in my mind, But the hunger to make something of myself, to rise above the mockery of my family, kept me going. The plan was taking shape, slowly but surely. I'd reached out to several potential investors, most of whom had a modest interest in commercial real estate. None of them had the fire in their bellies that I did. They were looking at the building as just another asset to add to their portfolio. But I wasn't just looking to buy property. I wanted to transform it, to bring life to it, to take a neglected piece of the city's skyline and turn it into something profitable. I wasn't merely asking for money. I was asking for belief. That belief came from an unexpected source. It started with an email. I had been tirelessly refining my pitch, gathering documents and putting together financial models, but I hadn't expected anyone to take it seriously. Most of the investors I'd approached had responded with polite rejections, but that afternoon, as I sifted through a pile of irrelevant correspondence, one name caught my eye: Benjamin Harris. Benjamin was a self-made millionaire with a portfolio of diverse investments, but he wasn't like the others. He didn't care about flashy cars or luxury apartments. He was focused on sustainable growth, on projects that brought long-term value, and I knew that if I could get him on board, I could make this work. The email was short, professional, but there was an unmistakable tone of interest. "I've seen your proposal, let's talk." No small talk, no sugarcoating, just a direct challenge to prove myself. I spent the next few hours preparing for the meeting, refining the proposal with more details and projections. I had no idea what Benjamin would be like in person, but I knew I had to make the most of this opportunity. I couldn't afford to miss it. When we finally met, I wasn't nervous. I had done my homework and I knew the building inside and out. I had every answer to every question ready. Benjamin walked into the small cafe with the kind of confidence I'd seen in those high-powered execs back in the corporate world. But there was something different about him. He wasn't looking to impress anyone. He was looking for substance. We exchanged pleasantries, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't wasting time. He wanted results, not talk. "You're the cleaner, right?" he said, after glancing at my resume. His tone wasn't condescending, just curious. "You've got a plan to buy that building, but it looks like you're operating with nothing but your wits and a few contacts. What makes you think you can pull this off?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. I could have been defensive. I could have apologized for my situation, but instead I looked him in the eye and said, "Because I see things that no one else does. I've studied that building. I know where the value is hidden. I know the tenants that are struggling and the ones that are waiting for the right moment to expand. I'm not just selling you a property. I'm selling you a vision." Benjamin sat back, tapping his fingers on the table. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his expression that told me he was intrigued. "All right," he said after a long pause. "I'm willing to give you a shot, but you'll have to prove to me that you can make this work. I'm not in the business of taking risks on pipe dreams. You've got one chance. You'll need to bring in some serious investors. You'll need to convince the owners that you're the one they should sell to. And most importantly, you'll need to show me that this building can make money." I nodded, feeling the adrenaline rush through me. This was it. My moment. "I can do that," I said. "I've already started reaching out to investors. I've got a couple of interested parties who are looking for a project just like this. The building's value is going to increase exponentially with the right renovations. I've got the blueprint for it. All I need is the backing to get started." Benjamin didn't smile, but he didn't need to. His next words were simple: "Let's see what you can do." That was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I worked harder than I ever had in my life. Every night after my shift, I met with potential investors, pitching my plan with relentless conviction. I met with contractors, architects, and real estate brokers, outlining how I could transform the underutilized parts of the building into something profitable. I spent hours at the building, pacing the empty floors, sketching out the vision I had in my head. I wanted to see every detail, from the way the light would flow into the office spaces to the layout of new common areas that could attract more tenants. The investors I'd spoken to started to get more serious, but the real win came when I managed to convince the current owners that I was the right person to buy the property. It wasn't easy. They were skeptical, understandably so. They had seen countless offers come and go, all promising the world but delivering nothing. But I had one thing they didn't expect. I had the numbers. I had the vision. And most importantly, I had Benjamin Harris on my side. The deal wasn't just a handshake, it was a contract. I was officially in the driver's seat, and the building would soon be mine. I remember the moment when the deal was finalized. As I signed the papers, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a financial transaction. This was me taking control of my life. I wasn't the cleaner anymore. I wasn't the man my family had mocked. I was the owner of an entire commercial property. And the best part? No one saw it coming. Not my family. Not my former colleagues. No one. I smiled as I walked out of that office holding the keys to my future in my hand. The road ahead would be difficult, but I had already come further than anyone could have ever imagined. The game had changed, and I was in it to win it. Owning a building wasn't like owning a car or a house. I had always understood the basics of property management, maintaining the space, keeping tenants satisfied, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But now, the weight of it was sinking in. The numbers were real. The responsibility was real. And suddenly, I wasn't just the underdog anymore. I was the person everyone would be watching. The pressure mounted every day, but I didn't let it overwhelm me. Instead, I channeled it into something more, a relentless drive to prove I could make this work. I knew that the renovation plan I had presented was ambitious. I wasn't just putting a new coat of paint on the building or installing a few modern light fixtures. I wanted to change the very nature of the space, to turn it into a place where tenants would not only want to stay, but thrive. I envisioned modern, flexible office spaces, state-of-the-art amenities, and a shared work environment that catered to the new generation of entrepreneurs. The first step was getting my hands dirty, quite literally. The renovation process was grueling, and I threw myself into it. Every day I was either meeting with contractors, coordinating the redesign, or negotiating with vendors to get the best prices. I spent hours walking through the building, inspecting every floor, making sure the work was progressing as planned. But as the weeks went by, I realized something that I hadn't fully anticipated. Not everyone believed in my vision. The tenants were skeptical. They had seen property owners come and go, promising changes that never materialized. They didn't trust that the changes I was making would truly benefit them. Others were downright hostile. One tenant, an established law firm that occupied one of the higher floors, expressed concerns about the renovation disturbing their business. "We can't afford to lose any time," the senior partner told me. "We've been here for years. I don't see the need for all these changes." At first, I was thrown off by the resistance. It wasn't just that they didn't want change. They were questioning whether I was competent enough to pull it off. I wasn't some seasoned property mogul with decades of experience. I wasn't even some flashy businessman who could promise them the world. I was the guy who used to clean their floors. But instead of backing down, I decided to face the challenge head-on. I scheduled a meeting with the law firm's partners and laid out the plans in meticulous detail. I explained how the renovations would not only modernize their space, but would increase the overall value of the building, leading to higher property values and ultimately higher rents. I assured them that their businesses would not be disrupted and that the renovations would be done in stages, ensuring minimal impact on their day-to-day operations. I could see the skepticism in their eyes, but as I spoke, I saw a flicker of something else, doubt turning into cautious optimism. By the time the meeting was over, they weren't fully convinced, but they were willing to give me a chance. That was all I needed. The renovations continued, and over the next few months, the building began to transform. The once stale, outdated offices turned into vibrant, modern workspaces. New tenants moved in, attracted by the freshly designed, flexible office environments. The once dull common areas became gathering spots for collaboration and innovation, with sleek furniture, shared conference rooms, and high-tech amenities that drew in a new generation of professionals. But the challenges didn't stop there. With each passing day, as the building became more successful, the pressure on me grew. I wasn't just managing a property anymore. I was managing expectations, my own and everyone else's. I had put myself in a position where I could either fail spectacularly or prove that I had what it took to make this work. And with every new hurdle, I had to remind myself that I wasn't going to give up. I had made it this far, and I wasn't about to let anyone's doubts stop me. I hired a team to handle the day-to-day operations of the building, property managers, maintenance workers, security personnel, but I still stayed involved. I didn't want to lose touch with the place that had started as a dream and was now becoming my reality. I wanted to be the face of this transformation, the one everyone saw working tirelessly to make it happen. And then, just as I thought I was getting a handle on things, something unexpected happened. Benjamin Harris, the investor who had helped me get started, called me one afternoon, and his voice was tight with urgency. "We need to talk," he said. "It's about the sale of the building." I had no idea what he meant. The building was mine now, wasn't it? What did he mean by the sale? When I met him in his office, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've been keeping an eye on the building's progress," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "I've been impressed. You've done more than I expected. But I've got a proposal for you. There's an opportunity to sell the property. The market's hot right now, and we could flip it for a huge profit." I sat there, processing his words. Sell? The building had only just started to show its true potential. I had spent months pouring my heart and soul into it. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. "I didn't buy this place just to sell it, Benjamin," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in flipping it. This building is my future. I'm going to build something that lasts." Benjamin raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my response. "You're not even going to consider it? The money we could make. This could be a huge return on your investment." "I didn't do all this just for money," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I've already made more than I ever thought I would, but it's not about the money anymore. It's about creating something that's mine. I'm going to see this through." The silence that followed felt thick. Benjamin studied me for a long moment before nodding. "All right," he said finally. "I respect that. But remember, you've got something valuable here. Don't lose sight of that." I left his office that day feeling both relieved and more determined than ever. I had the opportunity to walk away with a massive profit, but I wasn't going to take the easy way out. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much. I wasn't going to give up on my dream just for the sake of money. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just managing a building anymore. I was building a legacy, and no one, no matter how much money they offered, was going to take that away from me. The weight of ownership, of true ownership, was heavier than I'd anticipated. It wasn't just about managing the property. It was about navigating the complexities of people's expectations, managing my own vision while balancing the harsh reality of business. The stakes were high. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had advice. But none of them had spent the nights pacing the halls of the building, studying its every flaw and potential. None of them had lived this transformation day in and day out. This was my vision, and I wasn't about to let anyone pull me off course. But as with any great undertaking, there were new challenges. As the renovations began to show real progress, tenants started signing longer-term leases, and new businesses were taking interest in the spaces I had meticulously redesigned. However, with success came more complications. The first major obstacle came in the form of a corporate giant that had shown interest in renting a large portion of the property. This company, which had been growing exponentially, wanted to take up several floors, far more than I had originally anticipated. They offered a generous deal. The rent they promised would cover all the expenses and leave me with a comfortable margin. But something about the deal didn't sit right with me. I'd worked too hard to let this property turn into just another money-making machine, serving only the interests of a faceless corporation. The tenants I had cultivated, the small businesses, the startups, were what had made this building come to life. I didn't want to lose that spirit, that sense of community, for the sake of a big payday. I met with the company's representatives, sitting across from them in the sleek modern conference room I had transformed. The air felt thick with the weight of their intentions. They were persuasive, dressed in sharp suits, eyes glinting with the type of ambition that mirrored my own. But their words, though polished, didn't move me. They offered a deal that would lock me into long-term contracts and strip away any flexibility for the smaller tenants. It would disrupt the culture I had worked so hard to build. "So you're offering me a standard deal," I said, my voice steady. but with no room for smaller businesses to thrive. That's not going to work for me. I've got a vision for this building, and it's not just about filling every space with corporate tenants. You're not the only one who wants in. The representative, a sharp woman named Clara, leaned forward, a subtle smirk on her lips. I understand your position, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. But you have to understand that this building needs stability. Big corporations bring stability. Small businesses bring risk. I met her gaze without flinching. What I'm offering is something different, I said, my confidence rising. I'm building a community of small businesses that can grow together. You might not see the value in that now, but it's what makes this place unique. I'm not going to compromise that. Clara's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. You'll regret this, she said, standing up, her voice now cold. This opportunity won't come around again, think it over. I watched them walk out of the room, but inside, my decision was already made. I wasn't in this for a quick win. I wasn't going to sacrifice what I'd built for the sake of a corporate paycheck. The building wasn't just a piece of property. It was a living, breathing project that meant more to me than any profit margin could. But I knew that standing firm would come at a price. Clara's threat wasn't idle. The corporate world had a way of squeezing out the little guys, and I wasn't naive enough to believe that they would just walk away quietly. They'd find a way to get what they wanted, and I needed to be ready for that. The next few weeks were tense. Clara's company was relentless in their pursuit, offering more money, more perks, and more promises. But I held my ground. I knew the building was worth more than the corporate lease they were offering. I didn't need them to validate my vision. My tenants, the ones who had made this place thrive, were the proof. But then, the blow came. One evening I received a call from Benjamin Harris. His voice was urgent, strained. We've got a problem. The deal with the corporate tenant, it's not just about the space. They've got connections. They're pressuring other tenants. They've been making threats to pull out unless you agree to their terms. They're using their influence, and it's starting to work. My stomach sank. I knew this was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it real. The corporate giant wasn't just trying to lease space. They were trying to take over. And they had the power to do it. I wasn't just battling for control of the building, I was fighting to preserve the culture I had built. I won't sell out, I said, my voice low, a fire kindling in my chest. This building is mine. I'm not letting them take it, not like this. Benjamin sighed on the other end of the phone. I know, but we need a plan, fast. You can't fight them alone. That was the moment I realized just how high the stakes had become. It wasn't just about owning a building anymore. It wasn't just about turning a profit. It was about something bigger, something more personal. The building represented everything I had worked for, every setback, every failure, every piece of advice I had ignored. It wasn't just property. It was a symbol of my comeback, and no one was going to take that from me. I spent the next several days working tirelessly with Benjamin and the small group of investors who had believed in my vision from the start. We couldn't match the corporate giant's financial clout, but we had something they didn't. A network of loyal tenants, a community that valued the unique space we had created. I started leveraging everything I could. I reached out to the tenants who had thrived in the building, organizing meetings and discussions. I talked to small business owners, showing them how their success was tied to the success of the building as a whole. I rallied my team, and together, we launched a campaign to put pressure on the corporate entity. It wasn't just a fight for space, it was a fight for control of what this place had become. The battle was ugly. It took every ounce of energy I had to fight back. The corporate representatives played dirty. They spread rumors, made backdoor deals, and used their influence to try to intimidate my tenants. But in the end, it didn't matter. The tenants stood by me. They refused to back down. One by one, they refused to give in to the pressure. And as the battle raged on, it became clear that the community we had built was stronger than any corporate giant. In the end, the deal fell apart. The corporation couldn't break the will of the people who had chosen this building as their home. I had won, not just for myself, but for everyone who believed in the vision I had laid out. The building was mine to keep, and with that victory came a new sense of power. I had fought for control. I had protected my dream. And now, The future was finally mine to shape. As the dust settled from the battle with the corporate giant, something unexpected happened. There was no celebratory moment, no grand victory lap. The weight of it all hit me in waves, but it wasn't the weight of ownership anymore. It was the weight of responsibility. I had fought for this building, this dream. But now that I had it, I realized how much more work had to be done to truly make it my own. The tenants were more loyal than I had ever hoped for. They had rallied behind me, stood firm against the pressure, and now they were in for the long haul with me. But with every victory came new challenges. The building was thriving, but not without its growing pains. More tenants were showing interest, and there were offers on the table. The market was hot again, but now I wasn't just another player looking for a quick profit. I was an owner with a legacy on the line. I spent weeks getting the building back on track. The corporate giant had made things harder than they needed to be, but we had weathered the storm. There were still repairs to be done, adjustments to the layout, new projects to take on. But this time I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt prepared. I had learned from every setback and every success, and now I could see the building in a way I hadn't before, not just as a financial asset, but as a living, breathing part of my future. I kept my focus, keeping the big picture in mind, while not letting the small details slip through the cracks. Every decision I made came with consequences, and every change I implemented needed to have long-term viability. I had spent so many years battling for a piece of the corporate world, thinking I needed to prove myself to others, but now I realized that the real challenge was proving to myself that I could maintain what I had fought for. Benjamin Harris checked in regularly, offering advice, suggestions, and occasionally a reminder of how important it was to keep the building profitable. But his calls were more than just business. They were a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Benjamin may not have shared my passion for the building in the same way, but he respected my vision, and he saw that I had what it took to succeed. "Remember, Grant," he told me during one of our calls, "you don't need to win every battle, but you need to win the war. The building's potential is limitless, but you've got to keep your eye on the ball." That was the advice that stuck with me the most. It wasn't about winning each and every deal. It wasn't about running in circles trying to please everyone. It was about keeping my vision clear and focused, about ensuring that the decisions I made were sustainable in the long run. It wasn't easy, but I understood now why it mattered. The foundation was solid, and it was up to me to build from there. But even with everything starting to click, the pressure didn't go away. The same family that had once laughed at me was now watching from the sidelines, making comments behind my back, sending congratulatory messages that felt more like veiled attempts at regaining their lost confidence in me. I wasn't interested in their validation anymore, not like I once was. But I won't lie, it stung. It stung more than I cared to admit. One evening, after a long day of overseeing the renovations and finalizing a new lease agreement, my mother called. Her voice, as always, carried that mix of pride and skepticism. "I heard about the building," she said, her tone softer than usual. "I heard things are going well for you." I hesitated, wondering how to respond. It wasn't the apology I had secretly hoped for, nor was it the recognition I had dreamed of when I set out on this journey. But it was something. "I'm making it work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The building's doing well. We've got a lot of momentum now." There was silence on the other end for a few moments before she spoke again, her voice quieter. "I didn't think you could do it, Grant. I didn't understand, but I see now that you've built something real." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to lash out, to demand why it had taken so long for her to believe in me. But the other part of me, the part that had been through this battle and won, knew better. This wasn't about proving myself to her. It was about proving something to myself. I didn't need their validation, not anymore. "Thanks," I said, my voice calm. "It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it." The conversation ended, without much more fanfare. My mother hadn't apologized, and that was fine. I didn't need it. This victory wasn't for them, it was for me. It was for every sleepless night, every risk I took, every time I chose to bet on myself when everyone else doubted me. But I still wasn't done. There was more to be done, more to be built. The real work was just beginning, I wasn't about to rest on my laurels, no matter how far I had come. I had always envisioned myself at the top of the corporate world, sitting in those high-rise offices I once envied. But now, I understood something different. I didn't need the corporate world to validate my worth. I had created my own space, my own empire. This building was my foundation, and with every passing day, it became clearer that it wasn't just a business. It was a reflection of who I had become. I had taken the job as a cleaner to survive. I had started at the bottom with nothing but a dream and the will to prove myself. But I had fought for more than just survival. I had fought for a future that was mine to shape. I wasn't done yet. There were more challenges ahead, more obstacles to face. But I was ready to take on whatever came next. This was just the beginning, and I would make sure that the story of this building, of my journey, was far from over.